What I want to look at tonight is going to be interesting. The culmination of a lot of thought. Yeah, it's on. Thanks, Paul. And I know that we have been moving at a fairly rapid rate of knots over the last number of years. But as the light keeps coming, it's important for us to move with that light as we're able to move. And I know we've all been tremendously blessed. And many mornings I wake up now just like, my Father's not a killer. It's such a good feeling. It's such a good feeling to know that He's ever merciful, and that. And as someone sent me the text today, have a look at this in Psalms 112. It just comes out. We talked about there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, what is it that causes the weeping and gnashing of teeth? Psalms 112. And we look at, we can look from verse 8, speaking of the righteous. His heart is established, he shall not be afraid. And it says, until he, and those words is supplied, his desire, he sees his desire upon his enemies, until he sees his enemies. We can take out those supplied words. He hath dispersed, he hath given to the poor, his righteousness endureth forever. His horn shall be exalted with honour. Notice what it says, the wicked shall see it and be grieved. He shall gnash with his teeth and melt away. So what is it that causes the wicked to grieve? They see the goodness of the righteous. They see the righteousness of God, and the righteousness of God manifest in His people. And when the wicked see it, see what it says? They gnash their teeth, they're grieved, they're in anguish of spirit, and they melt away. There you go, another verse. Interesting. Just another little piece. So when we read in the New Testament where it says there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, you can come to Psalms 112 and you say, well, what causes the weeping and gnashing of teeth? This is it. But tonight, we want to put together a number of pieces and hopefully lock this into a framework that will all make sense to you. Maybe not all the pieces will come through, but we want to come to what we've been looking at in terms of the three angels' messages. And this is a sequence that I have mentioned before in terms of the first angel's message is a recipe that gives a result. This is the point that I want to focus on, because after the first angel comes, and he comes with a loud voice to every what? Nation, kindred, tongue and people. And he cries with a loud voice, and there's four things that the first angel speaks of. And we've been talking about this. The first one is fear God. And in order to fear God, you must know God. In order to know God, you must know that He has a Son. If you don't know the Father and Son, then you cannot fear the true God. Many of us have been on this journey, and this is the first component of the first angel's message, fear God. The second component is what?
Give glory to Him.
Give glory to Him. And where do we see God's glory manifested? John chapter 17 says, I have glorified you on earth. We see in the life of Jesus Christ the full revelation of the Father's character. In order for someone to give glory to God, they must know His character. This is the character message, the revelation of God's true character. And this is a key component of once you know the Father and Son, you become aware that truly our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son. And in that reality, we give glory to Him, because God so loved the world that He gave up, He offered up His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish and have everlasting life. Of course, the third component of this message is what? Of the first angel. The hour of His judgment is come. And we have all read this in the past, that the judgment is set and the books are open and God is poring over those books and He's examining us with a fine-tooth comb. One part that's missing, because this is a sequence. Fear the true God, know their character, make your judgment. The hour of his judgment is come. We are the ones that are in judgment of him. And as Jesus says in Matthew 7 verse 2, how does God judge? As you judge, you will be judged. This is the sequence. So when we know the true God and their relationship, we know their character, we then pass judgment on him. And in the days of Noah, Noah judged God as having grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's the reverse of God says, okay, I'll give you grace. That's the arbitrary sovereignty view of, I'll give you grace. Whereas Noah looked and with his understanding, he saw grace in the eyes of the Lord. And this is the judgment of Noah on God, that God was gracious and therefore he received grace. And then, of course, the fourth component of this message is worship him that made heaven and earth, the seas and the fountains of waters. This is almost a direct quote from the fourth commandment. Okay, so this is speaking of the Sabbath. So when people make their judgment, they connect into the Sabbath, and the Sabbath more fully because they fear the true God. They have the divine pattern. They know that the Sabbath comes in a divine pattern. They know that it comes through the feasts, and the Spirit is poured out with great power upon them. When this happens, what happens in verse 8? And they're what?
Followed another angel.
Followed another angel. This is the consequence. This is the consequence of getting these four components in the correct position. Knowing the true God, knowing his character is a consequence, passing judgment on his character, and then having it sealed into you through the Sabbath. Okay? So we can certainly say that, and we're talking about the sealing now, receiving the seal of the living God. What is the seal? Revelation 14:1, sealed with the Father's name or the Father's character? Father's character is what? Father's character is what is sealed. How is it sealed? It's written in the forehead, but how does it get written in there? Seal of the Spirit. How? Spirit. And then when does the Spirit do this? Worship him that made heaven and earth. Times of refreshing from the presence of the Lord, and he will send Jesus. So this is the Sabbath. This is the sequence. And as the Father's character by the Spirit through the Sabbath, and Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, is sealed into us, Babylon will fall.
It's a responding in obedience too.
Yes.
So it's just not a one-off thing.
No, it's not. Okay, but when we get this sequence, when this sequence comes in its proper order, then another angel will follow and say Babylon has fallen. Now, why is this so important? Because of its application to Revelation chapter 18. Because the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So in the fourth angel's message, we're having a repeat of which message?
Second.
The second angel's message. But the second angel's message is consequential to the first angel's message because the second angel is following the first angel as a result of the first angel. So in Revelation 18, we see another angel come down from heaven having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. Okay? And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon is fallen, and become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. This can only take place because of a repeated sequence of the first angel's message. Does that make sense? That the first angel's message is comprehended in much greater clarity because this angel comes down and this angel illumines the first angel, shows us the true God, shows us his character, and shows us when he's going to seal us with that character. Now, when we go back to the Adventist pioneers, and we read the book Early Writings, and you read the chapter on the solid platform, and if I'll go there, and we want to look at page, well, I think that's not what I want. It's on page 258, the solid platform, but I think on this I'll have to put 259, because, alright, the language she uses, I saw a company, this is a firm platform, chapter 61, Early Writings, I saw a company who stood well guarded firm, giving no countenance to those who would unsettle the faith of the body. God looked upon them with approbation. I was shown 3 steps, the first, second and third angel's message. Said my accompanying angel, woe to him that shall move a block or stir a pin of these messages. The true understanding of these messages is of vital importance. The destiny of souls hangs upon the manner in which they are received. And then she says these words, this is the point that I want to pick up. I was again brought down through these messages and saw how dearly the people of God had purchased their experience. Now notice what she says there. This is not just a message, it's a message that produces an experience. It's a story of a group of people who go through a certain experience. And if we are the sons and daughters of the Millerite movement, we not only inherit their message, we inherit their experience. Is that?
Yeah.
This is, and we can spend time. I won't go into all the details there, but if you look up the word 7 thunders, Ellen White says in regard to the 7 thunders that the angel spoke to John, she says this delineates certain events in the first and the second angel's message. The first 7 thunders are 7 events that took place in the first and the second angel's message between 1840 and 1844. Before the third angel's message began to sound. It was a delineation of events that took place. The first event being the fulfillment of Josiah Litch's prophecy in August 11, 1840, that the Ottoman Empire fell to the European powers and became the sick man of the East. That validated the Year Day principle, and then it sparked the rest of those 7 thunders to prepare God's people. Now, in my study of all of these things in terms of the whole inheritance principle, it's not only the message that we inherit, it's the experience that we inherit, and this is the point that I'm focusing on, because implied in the statement of the 4th angel repeating the second angel's message infers that this whole process is going to be repeated. The process of what happened with the pioneers between 1840 and 1844, well to 48, with the sealing message, when the sealing message began, that whole sequence is going to be repeated. You follow me? It's inferred, because the 4th angel is not a new message. It is a re-emphasis of an old message. And as we've picked up before, the first time this message was preached, it was not comprehended. Why do we know it wasn't comprehended? The impact. First angel's message, the second angel message followed with what type of a voice?
Just saying.
There's no emphasis.
No.
And why was there no emphasis? Did they have a correct understanding of who God was? Did the Millerites understand who God was?
Yes.
Yes, categorically. They knew who God was. Very clearly through the Christian connection, and Miller came into this understanding himself, as pointed out in 1842. The question is, did they understand the glory of his character? There's no emphasis. There's nothing that shows they understood the non-violent nature of our Father. Did they understand the hour of his judgment? Yes, they did. They clearly understood the judgment. And in their understanding, well, so they clearly understood, they knew the beginning of the judgment. Of course, their understanding of when that would occur was wrong. So they still had a problem there. And did they worship him that made heaven and earth?
No.
No. So it's not possible, it was not possible for them to say with a super loud voice, Babylon is fallen. It's not possible. But the template was laid down. The template was laid down in the Millerite movement. God has given his people a rehearsal leading to the second coming of Christ. So that those who are willing to inherit their message can also inherit their legacy and know what waits them in the future. Does that make sense? Their legacy is there for us, if we would pick up on it.
Yeah.
And so, with that thought in mind, I want to now move to an article that I put together some years ago called Adventism and the Seven Churches. And I've laid one piece at the strata for you, and now this is another piece that is important to get to the third part that I want to talk to you about. So the seven churches. If we list out the seven churches, we have Ephesus, and what's the characteristic of the church of Ephesus? They lost their first love. Lost first love. No, that's not the direction I want to go. The word Ephesus itself, what does it mean? Desirable. They were desirable. They lost their first love is what happened to them towards the end. Desirable. And what happened to, what's the next church? Oh, SM. Smyrna. Nope. Sacrifice. Sweet smelling when crushed. Thank you. Very good. You've done your Revelation seminar. Sweet smelling when crushed. Sweet smelling. When crushed. I could have wrote sacrifice, but okay. This is forming an important template. Pergamos. Exalted through marriage. Thank you. Exalted. How was the church exalted through marriage in this? So let's step back. The seven churches represent what? 7 periods of time.
7 experiences of God. Personal experience.
Yep, personal experience within the church of God. John was told, write the things which must shortly come to pass, which will soon come upon the scene of history. 7 churches, it's a prophecy, because there were more than 7 churches in Asia. John to the 7 churches which are in Asia, 7 is a complete number. They don't mention Colossae. Colossae is not mentioned, it's one of the churches in Asia. It's not mentioned. So these, and all of these were on a specific mail route, and this is the order that mail route was. So it's all in order, and so it's a prophecy. So this is a prophecy of the Christian church from the time of Christ to the end of the world. This is what our Millerites. I'm inheriting our Millerite history, and I validated it myself for my own conscience. That's up to you whether you do that. So Pergamos is the time of Constantine, and Constantine, in order to meet Christianity, he compromises, he brings in, he waters down the church and favours the church, and this corrupts the church. And this is where Satan's seat is. There's a period of compromise. And that's the point. We have desirable, we could say suffering, and then we have compromise. This is the template. Thyatira. What's Thyatira? To wear away. Wear out the saints of the Most High. This is the Dark Age period. And this is when the church becomes heavily institutionalized. It's emboldened its institution, it's become very organized, very powerful. This is the most powerful stage of a church in this 7 cycle. So this is the institution. The church was run by lawyers. Everything was the laws that they had to run, and we have in the city of Constance in Germany, there's a magnificent monument there to the Council of Constance, that took place there in Germany, and it's a huge statue of a prostitute with the devil in one hand and the Pope in the other, because of all the prostitutes required to service the papal court during their council. They had it all worked out, didn't they? And the abuse that started to come about because of that. So, institutional phase, a strong emphasis on institution. What comes after Sardis? What happens in Sardis?
Things remain.
Things remaining. What time period is this? Reformation. There is a split in the church. This is when a split starts to take place. There's revolt starting to occur within the church, and fragments. The church begins to fragment and go off in different directions, and all kinds of things start to take place. After Sardis, there is Philadelphia, which means what? Broken love. Brotherly love.
Brotherly love. Sorry, I can't read my writing. Yeah, that's better.
Probably was a bit broken, but it was brotherly love. Brotherly love. And then you have Laodicea. And what does Laodicea mean? People of the judgment. Judging the people. Judgment.
What's that word after in Tyra? No, Sardis. What is it?
Things remaining.
Things remaining.
Things remaining.
Things remaining.
Thank you.
Sorry.
It's all right.
My lousy scribble.
Put some legs on the.
On the D.
Where?
At the beginning of
Things
remaining.
remaining.
That's
There
better.
you
Got some legs on him.
Remaining.
So this is the sequence of the entire church. This is the life cycle, and that there's a desirable phase where light is injected, and there's suffering, there's compromise, then there's institutionalization. Through that compromise, there's a split, and from that split, from the things that are left, there is brotherly love. This is in the dross, through the dross being burnt out from the fragmentation, and then there's a judgment that takes place. Now, what I'm suggesting in this article is this same process has occurred within the Seventh-day Adventist Church itself. Okay? This whole cycle has begun. The pioneers were desirable, weren't they?
Yeah.
But they lost their first love. They became dry as the hills of Gilboa. But they suffered much for the cause of truth, up through their beginnings of their movement. And if I've got it... Let me just make sure. Yeah, I've got it here. It says in Revelation 2:9 that you are rich. Now, if we were to draw the parallel, I put down this first stage is from 1840 to 1863, up to the time when the church organised. The church was desirable, but they lost their first love. They got heavily involved in debates. They could beat anybody in their power and ability to debate, and in doing that they lost their first love. And during the time from 1863, I've got 1863 to 1895, the church did go through great persecution in terms of their belief in the Sabbath and their views on the divinity of Christ. They were attacked on this issue mercilessly. They're saying, you don't believe in the Trinity, you don't believe in the Trinity. They got attacked on this point quite a lot. But they became rich in this time period. How did they become rich? What happened in this time period? 1888 message. They received the richness of the 1888 message. This is what came to them in this time period. But they rejected it. They rejected this. And so between 1895 and 1931, we had the period of compromise. After the falling away, there was a falling away that began to take place amongst God's people. Men began to rise up, and of course, We see in 1926 Leroy Froome comes on the scene and he begins to do his work. And in 1931, Francis Wilcox, without any consultation, without any Bible study, drafts up this document of fundamental beliefs and inserts the word Trinity, and nobody votes on it, just goes straight into the yearbook in 1931. Just like that. Amazing. So then we have from 1931 to 1980, we have the time of institutionalization. This is when they put out the Adventist Bible commentary, when the ministry magazine, the institutions and the places of learning that they began to develop, and the development of, and probably the biggest icon of this institutionalization is the church manual. We have a policy, and according to this policy, you will die. That's the institutionalization process of 1931 to 1980. After 1980, did we have a Protestant movement within Adventism? All the independent movements that burst forth out of the church after Glacier View and with Walter Ray and with the Davenport tax crisis and just on and on and on, and all the independent ministries with, was it Steps to Life? And the Standish Brothers and Ralph Larson and Ron Spear and the Gospel Brothers. Sorry? Brinsmead. He came a bit earlier. He was a bit earlier. And there's just this fragmentation, and we had the rise of, and we've got a descendant of one of the original CBs over there. The rise of the CBs. Because our doctrine was being ripped and taken, but the compromise had happened a long time before that. And so this period from 1980, and I've written in the document, Sardis, 1980 to the present. This fragmentation process that has taken place within the church. And we are on the verge of the next stage, which is Philadelphia. The things that the brotherly love that begins to be manifested as God's people are trying to. We've come through all of this process, the suffering, the compromise, the institution dominance, the split, and now where are we? Where are we going? What are we doing? And this drives people to study their Bibles once again, so that they come back to the point of Philadelphia in order to be ready for the judgment. And the reason I'm saying this is because of the Council to Philadelphia. If this template is applied to Adventism, and we follow the template, and I think we can see the process fairly clearly that we are in a post-mega institutionalized situation. There's plenty of books I could quote. Even George Knight wrote one talking about the fat lady and just saying that the church was breaking apart. That Adventism had become a little bit too comfortable and stopped exercising. So, and other books along the same lines of the fragmentation, how we deal with fragmentation. The fragmentation now is a serious concern, particularly because the church now has a major problem with people who no longer believe in the Trinity. And this, of course, has been the institutionalization of the Trinity is what caused the flock to scatter. Well, not after 1980, it took another 14 years before, but hang on a minute, we've got a problem. We have a big problem. And so it's the Council to Laodicea that I want, to Philadelphia, that I now want to focus in on. Let's have a look at Revelation chapter 3, verse 11 to 13. So we've just applied the seven churches template to the Adventist church to locate ourselves in that pattern sequence to see if this counsel applies to us. Now, Jesus says to the Philadelphians, "Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Him that overcometh will I make" what? a pillar in the temple of my God. So the language of Philadelphia is the building of the temple, and it's talking about us as individuals being part of that temple. And he will go out no more, and I will write upon him the name or the character of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem. So the building of this city is the building, the bringing together of a group of people that are fitly framed together to form a living temple to which the Spirit of the living God can come and indwell. And so we read, I'm reading here, Prophets and Kings, page 36. It says, she's speaking here of Solomon's temple, and of this temple, she says, was a fit emblem of the living church of God on earth, which through the ages has been building in accordance with the divine pattern. That's an interesting piece of language, isn't it? So the temple is being built according to the divine pattern. That's interesting language for us, who've been on a journey with a divine pattern, that are God's people, are we being brought together based on the divine pattern? Now, of course, Ellen White is talking about, she's not talking specifically about what we understand that term to mean, but could that be something that's connected to this? I'll just leave that thought with you. Andrew's thinking. No? No, I thought you were raising your hand. No? Good. All right. So we then turn to Ephesians chapter 2. We look at a few more texts. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 19 to 22. And Paul again is using this illustration. Now therefore you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together grow unto what? Holy temple in the Lord. So this building of this temple has reference to the time period of Philadelphia, and for God's people in the last days, we are to be built together in this temple. This is what it's saying to the Philadelphians. We're going to be brought together, to be fitly framed together, to as not as just as individuals, but as a group of people, to be infilled with the Spirit of the living God. Okay? And then the church is, as it says, the New Jerusalem is a city, is adorned, ready. Well, let me read it. Revelation 21, 9 to 12. And it says, "Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain." That's verse 10, 21:10. "And showed me" what? That great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. This is the bride. She's a big bride. It's a big city. But this is referring to the people. The people are the bride of the Lamb, and they are comprised in a temple format. And so the next thing that I want to say is this quote here in Signs of the Times, December 13, 1883. "The experience of Nehemiah is repeated in the history of God's people in this time." That was written in 1883. As she writes that about the building of the temple, this is just before the 1888 message is about to begin. And they were given the opportunity to start building the temple. Okay, and she says, what happened in the time of Nehemiah is applicable to this time. So if they had listened to the voice, they could have built the temple. And she said that the temple, that Nehemiah's temple building experience is applicable to this time.
Was that their ark?
Yes, that's part of the ark process. So and then you have to. Oh. Can I help? Am I going to make a mess here?
Just wipe off.
Huh?
Wipe off. Just wait 1 sec.
Get that.
4, 3, 2, 1. Lots of
Ready? I gotta clean this up. Oh, this is making a mess. Can someone help me with this?
Steph's there.
I'll bring it to you.
Do your stuff, Steph.
Oh, very good.
Now hit it.
There we go. All right.
You need a bigger
You
board.
do the blue side, Steph, because it's very smart.
Thank you. We interrupt this broadcast. So the point we're making is, she says, what happens in the time of Nehemiah is applicable to this time. Now, if God's people had received the 1888 message, they would have been able to complete the building of the temple. But they didn't. And so it got delayed. And thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you've got to keep going. So, when we look at the building of Nehemiah's temple, how long did it take to build Nehemiah's temple?
Not very long.
very short time.
Daniel chapter 9, it tells you how long. That the wall would be built in troublous times. Daniel chapter 9 tells you
6 years, wasn't it?
25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem.
What's days?
25?
Sorry.
No worries. Shall be, how many weeks?
7 weeks.
7 weeks and?
3 score and 2.
Why does it say 7 weeks and 60? Why doesn't it just say 69 weeks? Okay, it mentions 7 weeks. Thank you. And then 62 weeks. And then it says the street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. So the temple of Nehemiah was completed in 408 BC. 408 BC. Exactly one Jubilee. From the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was 457 BC. Okay? 457, 57 minus 8 is 49. 49 years. From the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, it took 49 years. How long did it actually take to build the temple? They got the command in 457.
46 years, wasn't
46 years.
it? According to the Jews.
John 2:20. Look at John 2:20. We're looking at this because Ellen White says that the building of the temple, or the time of Nehemiah, which was the building of the temple, has an application to our day. It applies to us today. And it says in John 2:20, what does it say?
Thanks to the Jews, 40 and 60 years this temple in building, and they'll rear it up in 3 days.
40 and 60 years was this temple in what? Building. Now, Herod was doing something to the temple at that time, wasn't he? He was rebuilding or refurbishing the temple. He didn't build it in 46 years. So they're not talking about what Herod is doing.
No.
Okay? They're talking about what Nehemiah had done, and Zerubbabel, what they had done back, and it took 46 years. So, it obviously took took 3 years for them to get the materials, to get the call, to be able to go back over, Ezra and Nehemiah, to get over there and to start building. It took them about 3 years. And then they got there and they started building, and then they had interruptions, and Sanballat and all these other people got involved, and they got it halted by Darius, and then they got it going again, and in 408 it was complete. Okay? So it was 46 years in building. 46 years to build. Okay? Now, why is this significant? And this is the point that I want to lay out to you. And at this particular point, I I've taken the decision, after consulting with the elders, that I'm going to lay this out. I'm not saying that this is locked in. I'm putting it out there so that we can study this and look at it and give it consideration. I'm not going to just keep it to myself. I would much rather put it out there and have people challenge it and test it. And if they have to, throw mud at it. All is helpful because I really want to test this out.
Question. When did the Father-Son movement start?
You're thinking. Very good. When did it start?
1980.
Many of us were recently at a funeral of one of the pioneers
Blair.
of the Father-Son movement in Australia. Now, he spoke to me about this issue. He was thinking about it. He spoke to me and my wife in 1993. And he was thinking about this. The first meetings in Australia, there were noises that were starting to come from America. There was a bit of a stir that began in 1992, 3, they were starting to surface, but then 1994 it came out, and then 1995 there was actually a book that was distributed at the General Conference session called No New Leaders, No New Gods. It's written by Fred Alabac, and it was a direct appeal to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in regard to the Trinity and women's ordination. It was a book way ahead of its time, as most people, but on the other hand it wasn't. So you're talking 1993, 4, 5 is when this started to agitate in Adventism once again. It had basically been dead and buried. It was quite a shock in the late 60s when someone heard W.R. French launch into an attack on the Trinity at Pacific Union College, and everyone was like, what? You know, it was a shock for them in the late 60s that someone would attack the Trinity and say this wasn't part of our original doctrine. And then after he went, it virtually went silent. It went silent until there was only one or two voices. A few letters were written by George Grow and others to the Standish brothers, to Robert Wheeland, to a number saying, hey, there's a problem with the Trinity, but nothing was heard. But then the agitation began in 1993, 94, 95, and it began to come out again. And partly this came about because there was a purple book that was put out concerning certain private independent ministries. And in that book, which this came out, do you remember when it came out, Craig?
Got issues.
Issues.
Got a date on it, I just can't picture it.
Was it 1990? 91?
91, I think.
91, where people were claiming to be historic Adventists, and the church, in their wisdom, said, well, if you want to be historic Adventists, then you need to give up the Trinity, because they didn't believe in the Trinity. And everyone went, what? We didn't believe in the Trinity? And that actually sparked. And then George Knight gave it a really good shove-along in October of 1993. He said many of the founders of our church would not be able to join the church today. And we can credit George Knight with helping to lay the foundation. Because that got people motivated. It's like, what do you mean? And you're saying we haven't changed anything, and then you say they can't join the church? This is a problem. So that's October 93 when that was written. You have Johnson writing, he says, what did he say? He said some of the changes that were most startling. Startling. The very words that Ellen White used about the Omega. Most startling. The Trinity. This is all 1993, 94. And of course we have the famous statement by Gordon Jensen in 1996, I think it's 1996, where he says, he comes out with this new doctrine where the committee of three decided on who would be Father and who would be Son and who would be Holy Spirit. The committee of three. This is what took place at that particular time. So the cornerstone began to be laid, I would say around 1994. And why do I say 1994? Well, it's based on a Jubilee principle. Because if you follow the Jubilees, you go from 408 BC and you go to 1994, and you're using the 49-year cycle from 408 BC to 1994, that's 49 Jubilees. Is that a coincidence?
To the year, 49 to the year.
49 to the year. From 408, you know, do the math without the zero. You're going to take the zero U out. 408 BC. What does it work out to? 1994. We'll do the math. So if we do, someone got it? So it's minus 408, plus 1994. So that's 1,586 years.
They got to add them.
You got added.
We've got to add them together, don't you? Wait, someone's awake. 408 plus
It's 24, 112.
4. Back fingers. 408 plus 1994 equals 2,000. That's saying 2,400 and should be, when you take 0, it's 2,401. Divided by 49. 49. We've got 4902 because I've got the 0 year in there. That's 49 Jubilees from the completion of the physical temple. So the physical temple was completed in 408 BC, and we come 49 Jubilees, and the cornerstone of the Father Son, of the Son of God, the cornerstone gets laid again in Adventism in 1994, 49 Jubilees later. Is that Palamonite? Is that wonderful number? Is there a link here? This is the point between, and this is where the divine pattern comes in. The physical temple, the visible temple, and then a 49 Jubilee cycle, and I guess what we would say then, if we go another 49 years to make it 50 Jubilees, the 50th Jubilee from 408 BC, because this is when the spiritual temple is going to be built, we come to the year 2043. And in 2043, we're exactly 50 Jubilees from when the physical temple was built. And that's the completion of 50 Jubilees. Is that a coincidence?
Yeah.
Alright?
What did you just say?
Glad someone's awake.
What did you just say?
What did I just say?
No, thank you for the things. What's the significance of the year 2043?
It's the 50th Jubilee.
50th Jubilee.
Jubilee.
From the building of the
Yeah.
temple.
Yeah, okay. What happens in 2043?
The temple is completed. The temple will be built. The bride will be ready.
Yeah.
And we read in early writings,
And then what happens?
we read in early writings, when you think about this, this is the...
You're trying to start out of dates, aren't you? You're trying to start out of date.
So,
No, I'm hoping we're not solving the other day.
if we come to... Oh, I've got the wrong one. Here it is. Early writings, page 35.
Very good to know the time we're living in.
Early writings, page 35. We see here that on page 34, it says, where does it say? It talks about time of trouble. Trying to find it where it says that God announces the day and the hour of Jesus' coming. Where does it say that? I can't find it. Anyway, it says there that God, you'll find it in there, it says God announces the day and hour of Christ's coming, and then Ellen White says these words, then commenced the Jubilee, when the land should rest. So we know that the coming of Christ is going to be a Jubilee. Okay? And in the cycle of 457 BC, coming through 408 for the completion of the physical temple, through to 2043, from there to there, we've got 50 Jubilees. So the last Jubilee was 1994, the next Jubilee is 2043. Okay? Which means that the time period that we are in now, is actually a Jubilee of Jubilees. It's it's a whole period that is on this cycle. So if there's ever, and this is the point, and I can see Andrew getting a bit twitchy, but
As long as you know, if you are going to reference my twitchiness,
that's
you
where I'm
know
getting.
exactly what I'm twitchy about.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're going to talk about my twitchiness, I do hope you know exactly what I'm twitchy about.
Just relax. Just relax. So when the Spirit is being poured out with great measure, and if the temple is going to be completed, the next most opportune time for this to take place, for its completion to take place, would be 2043. Now immediately this raises some questions, like, are you saying that Christ is coming in 2043? No. I'm saying that the next available opportunity for what Ellen White says here, that the Jubilee should be completed, if we're following this sequence correctly, would be 2043.
Early writing 34, paragraph.
Where it says God announces the day and hour.
No, it just says, then commence the Jubilee when the land should
Yes, then commence the Jubilee.
I can't
Yes.
find the
Yeah.
speaking of the day now.
It's
Yeah, it is. As God spoke the day and the hour.
as God spoke the day and the hour.
Yeah, Israel God stood up. Isaac sat with listening to the words that came from the mouth of Jehovah.
What page
So-
is that?
Early writings, page 34.1 and... Sorry.
No, that's all right. So the challenge then is this a time prophecy?
No.
This is not a time prophecy. This is talking about when the Spirit is being poured out in greater measure and the most opportune time for the church to be able to respond. This is what we're talking about. Now, the other thing that's really important to understand about, and this is why I've produced this here, the 7th month movement, is the Karaite calendar. Because there's one of the challenges that comes when you start to move in this type of a direction is that no man knows what? The day or the hour. And so the thing is, with the Karaite Jewish calendar system, you cannot know the day or the hour. You can't.
He's down with the grain.
You don't know until you get to the point
That's right.
what the day and the hour is going to be for that particular year. You cannot predict the day and the hour. It's not possible. Okay? And this is something that is very important in terms of William Miller never predicted a day. He predicted a year for when something would take place. And others came along, and of course the calendar was worked out, which was important in terms of the investigative judgment. But, and of course God got right behind that. So this is something that's of interest to me in terms of this Jubilee system. I'm putting it out on the table because I think, should we ignore this?
However, that things can change. Like, didn't God say He would shorten the time? Also, you've got to look at rejection of the message, all that sort of stuff. You have to go within that.
And so it is possible. It is possible that God's people don't accept and they reject, and it will continue. The problem is with that is that 1798 is what? What is 1798 biblically?
Into the 2300 days.
The time of the
end.
Time of the end. Time of the end. How far can we get away from that day and still be time of the end? This is one of the problems. So, and the other thing that makes me think along these lines, and this becomes the test. This becomes the test of the message that we have been receiving over the last number of years, does this message have the capacity to have the temple built within that time frame?
Well, it should be able to be built within one's lifespan.
Within one lifespan, yeah. So, this is something that I'm putting out for us consideration. And in terms of cutting short, yes, I've thought about that. But Ellen White says, then commence the Jubilee. Now, it may not be on this cycle, but in terms of the building of the temple and the repeating of the building of the temple and all of those things that are taking place in terms of Nehemiah and all those aspects, that's on this cycle. The 457, 408, AD 34, and the sealing message of 1848 is all on this cycle. They're all on this cycle. So, all right, got some people that are...
Yeah, Stephanie's got something she wants to share.
Okay.
She needs to share.
She needs to share, okay.
No.
Well, so from 25 years from now, it's going to be 2043. And in Ellen White's writings, he said that William Miller said that in 25 years from 1818, Christ would appear for the redemption of his people.
You didn't help her find that.
I didn't help her find it, that's why I got her to share it. She found it herself.
So when did he discover this?
1818.
1818. And what did he say? How long from there?
He reached the solemn conviction that in about 25 years Christ would appear for the redemption of his people.
1843.
Are we inheriting this history? But on a completely different... Thank you, Stephanie. That's interesting to me. So that the discovery is made with 25 years to go.
Does it then work in, because with your churches, we went 1980 to present in Sardis, so is that the brotherly love in Philadelphia?
Philadelphia is now temple language. I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. The temple now is going to be built in a spiritual setting. And the reason, there's a number of things that I want to share with you on this, and of course, sharing something like this, and I've shared this with a number of people, and I'm saying this is going to test people as to whether they've been listening all along. And that's just a process we have to go through in terms of this is going to sound completely nutty, but if you've been listening, then you'll know that, hang on, as I said in the beginning, the people of God purchased this, they purchased their experience through a very difficult process in the first, second and third angels message. And this is the thing. Now, I've looked very carefully in terms of Revelation chapter 10 tells us there shall be time no longer.
Right.
And this ends the prophetic periods. You cannot use the prophetic periods to predict anything from 1844. Can't do that. This is not a time prophecy. This is a prophecy built into, or not a prophecy, this is something simply looking at the Sabbath itself.
The pattern.
The pattern of the Sabbath, and saying, when is the Spirit going to be operating the most fully? And if we are in a Jubilee of Jubilees, then we might be able to explain the great light that has been coming to us over the last number of years. Because if you think this light is simply coming from an individual, a human being, you're crazy. That's not possible. It's not possible that this light could come from human beings. There is nothing when you study Adventist history that can explain the movement that is taking place at the present time. There's nothing that can explain it other than 1994 in the Jubilee, God initiates a movement. He lays his cornerstone. He begins to build the temple. The other reason why I think, if you want to say...
Just the only other parallel to it is what happened with the Advent movement in 1830s to 1844. And after that. I mean, that's the same thing. That all happened. How?
Yeah. How did that happen? So...
My thoughts also go back to the Israelites when they were on the border of Canaan the first time, and then the second time they came back, and the Moabites were there, and all that sort of stuff, which we're seeing but they went through.
They didn't go back into wilderness again.
No.
So you've got another part of the pattern there in terms of Kadesh Barnea. In 1888, and we know this from Taylor Bunch's book, we came up to the promised land and we went back into the wilderness. The pattern, and Ellen White says, we are repeating the history of that people when we come up again the second time.
And also, Rome surrounded the camp. And
Yeah.
they left.
Okay?
And they'll come back the second time, and this
Yeah.
will not go away.
Okay.
Just when you were saying very earlier about what was sealed with God's character, how the Spirit went times refreshing the Sabbath, because in Leviticus 23, the first one that talks about it, the feasts and the festivals is the Sabbath, but then it's the ongoing other ones. So the increase of the refreshing and the sealing is through the other feasts.
Correct. This is the Jubilee principle. That this is, in terms of the temple building process, this whole period from 1994 to 2043 is a Jubilee. Every year is a Jubilee. Because it's a Jubilee of Jubilees, and so it gets magnified. So that when we come to the final year, that's the Jubilee of the Jubilee. That's when the Spirit is going to be the most powerful in terms of being able to be given to God's people. And if we think about this, and you need to think about this level, and there's reasons why I'm introducing this information at this time, and that is, anybody who thinks that Jesus is going to come back in the next 5 years is happy for most of the people in Asia to lose their eternal salvation, because we have almost no penetration into these countries. There has to be a change in the world order for us to be able to get into some of these countries and to be able to preach the message that we have been given about the loving character of our Father. It's going to take a little bit of time. But if you think about the message that we've been given, 25 years is ambitious. It's super ambitious to be able to take this to the whole world. But what happened with the Millerite movement? How long did they have?
25 years.
25 years.
And the apostles did it in their lifespan.
In their lifespan. And so this places us in an interesting situation. And another reason why I'm saying this is because of something Colin shared the other day in regard to the sealing message. That when the sealing message began to be preached, there was a commotion within the world that encouraged people to abandon what they were studying in order to just prepare for the coming of Christ. And I believe we're going to repeat this part of the history as well. And the reason that I'm saying this is because if I'm reading things in terms of what's happening in the world order of things, and the things that the current President of the United States is doing, it would seem to me, and this fits another pattern in terms of when Adventism first accepted the Trinity in 1980, and we go 40 years from there, that it's very possible that Donald Trump, if it is true what I'm hearing, that a number of the generals of the United States Army came to him and asked him to run, and that they would back him to save the United States. And this means that the United States, I believe, in the very near future, will transition from a republic to an empire. And many people will take this transition as evidence that the coming of Christ is now. But I don't believe that that's the case. And the reason I don't believe that is the case is because of what Ellen White says regarding Daniel chapter 11. She says that much of Daniel 11 will be repeated. Now, some of us, I've been introducing some material in reference to some of the work that's been done by Ruben Gonzalez on the Genesis of history, the Fourth Kingdom. I believe that the template that is laid out in this book is a template that, with some modification, can withstand the greatest scrutiny. And what this booklet is saying is that, and it's very careful as it goes through Daniel chapter 11, is that the language of Daniel 11, and I just want you to look at one thing to consider, and that is in Daniel chapter 10. Daniel chapter 10. And it says here in verse 14, "Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people when? And that word latter days is the end of time. Daniel chapter 11 has direct application to the end of time. And how can this be possible? How could this be possible? This booklet, Genesis of History, the Fourth Kingdom, will show you how that's possible, and not only possible, how that it is most likely that this is the case. And that the period of Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece and Rome is matched by the Holy Roman Empire, the rise of the Protestants, the rise of France, and the rise of the United States as the Fourth Kingdom. The United States is the Fourth Kingdom. The other thing that we need to consider, and Ellen White says this, that Daniel is a prophecy and Revelation is a revelation. Revelation manifests what is taking place in the book of Daniel. If that is the case, and we see America, the two-horned beast in Revelation 13, where is America in the book of Daniel? If it's in the book of Revelation, and this is a revelation of the book of Daniel, where is America in the book of Daniel?
Chapter 11.
Historically, we have not seen this anywhere. And yet, in Daniel 11, which goes right down to the close of probation, the United States, if it's making an image to the beast, it has to be in Daniel chapter 11. It's got to be mentioned in there, because it is the power that enforces the image to the beast. It's got to fit in this. And so, what we see in Daniel chapter 11 is with the Roman, if there is a parallel between Rome, and I'm just giving a very quick summary, if there's a parallel between Rome and America, Rome was a republic which then became an empire. And when the decision was taken by Julius Caesar, when he was encouraged by some around him, he crossed the Rubicon and he took control of Rome and overtook the Senate and made himself the emperor of Rome. And he became the first of 3 emperors. The next one after him was Augustus, and the final one was Tiberius. 3 emperors that would rule. And if this is the pattern that is going to be, and these are the three that are mentioned in Daniel chapter 11, when the United States becomes an empire, there will be 3 emperors that will take place, that will be in that position. And then the other events will begin to unfold that we see in Daniel chapter 11. I'm just laying out one pattern for you. But the reason why I'm saying this now is because I believe that in a very short period of time, the whole world order is about to change. I don't think any one of you would disagree with that. But the thing that why I'm saying this now, and I feel impressed to say this now, is that if you get tempted to think that the second coming is going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, you are going to be, like our pioneers were tempted in 1848, to be led astray, to forget our message, to drop the ball, and not stay on track with the message that we've been given. Because Adventism, the Adventist church, is ready with this transition that's about to take place. They're ready to scream the end of the world. Because that's where they're at. But this will be a decoy. This will be a decoy, and it is certainly a transition that will be taking place. And so I felt, for a number of reasons, to say, from what I'm studying in the book of Daniel and Revelation, and what I know of the history of our pioneers and all the other things that are taking place, the reason I'm simply saying to the next Jubilee is not to make a specific prediction, but to say that the events that are about to unfold are not the end. That's the important thing. That's the really important thing that I'm trying to get across here.
It's going to take time.
It's going to take a little bit more time than that, and I think if I'm reading the history correctly, we're going to see 3 presidents that are no longer Republican presidents, but they are kings, they are monarchs of the United States. Because the United States, or those who have the power levers in control of the United States, are not going to surrender to China and Russia. They are not going to do this. They are going to take over and rule the world.
It's interesting, China's just gone this way.
Yeah, and did you hear what Trump said about it?
He said he wished he could do it.
Basically, he commended them.
Oh,
Okay.
no, yes.
Yeah, he commended them for what they did.
Yeah.
So, At the end of last year, Donald Trump assembled all of the generals that he had with him, and he stood there in a large hall and he said, "This is the calm before the storm." So there is great changes about to take place in human history. Donald Trump has shown he's not scared to do whatever he has to do and to play his part. And whatever that part is, and whatever cog he is in terms of the New World Order, I don't exactly know where he fits in that. But he has all the makings of becoming the American Julius Caesar and crossing the Rubicon and taking control of the American empire. That's what I'm reading. That's what I'm seeing in current events. But that this is not the end. This is not the end. There will be challenges. Everything's going to change. But this then will give us greater opportunities, I believe, to reach into some of these countries that haven't been reached. And of course, aided by the Spirit of God, He will help us to do, as it says in verse 36 of Daniel 11, to do great exploits. And this verse is applying, as it says, to the last days. And Ellen White says, particularly verse 31 to the end of the chapter of Daniel 11, will be repeated. In these, she wrote that in 1896, which means future from her days. She says, this is going to be repeated from verse 31 onwards. And so when we're putting all these pieces together, while I'm intrigued, and certainly the overtones in terms of 2043, the next Jubilee being a completion from the physical temple to the spiritual temple and the Jubilee and all those things that lock in. Those things we need to continue to study. But my greater burden is to make the point that don't drop the ball from the events that are about to take place. In the next year or two, we're going to see a great transition. The economy that we are in now is going to completely collapse. It's going to be completely replaced. All those things are going to change. We know this. Australia's in a ridiculous housing bubble. The whole thing is going to crash. And I think moves are afoot now to destabilise the environment. The Banking Royal Commission is now showing the garbage that's occurring within the banking system. They're trying to destabilise the system. They're trying to start to pull the levers a little bit in that area. I don't know how that's going to all play out. But I want you to look, as it says in Daniel 11. It says, verse 35, and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. I'm trying to find the other part where it says there. But in any case, I'm laying out for you quite a number of things here, and I just thought, I've been thinking about some of these things for a number of years, and I just thought, I need to share these things now, and I need to put it on the table, and I believe that the year 2043 is going to be an extremely significant date for God's people, because it's the next Jubilee on that cycle, and we have an opportunity to complete the temple, or that God can complete the temple within us. We have 25 years. There is a parallel, the fact that God may be revealing this to us in 2018, as Miller had it revealed to him in 1818, with 25 years, that we have 25 years. Those parallels are of interest, and I think they are interesting. Of course, in saying all of this and presenting all this information, the naysayers, those who resist, they'll only pick on one thing and they will hammer that one point. You're saying that Christ is coming in 2043. So, and I'm like, well, aren't you saying that Christ is coming in the next 5 years? So, isn't that what most Adventists are doing? 5 or 10 years? It's always 5 or 10 years. No, this is further off. This is further off from now. And again, we can't say for sure. but I'm saying these things are there for us to consider. I ask you to think about it, to pray about it, and remember, it's not a time prophecy. The Karaite Jewish calendar cannot predict the day, the hour. This is not possible. If you're running on the other calendar, you can predict exactly the day and the hour. And I think that's part of the problem. And that will run into problems if you run that calendar and you start to come into this type of a message, you're going to come unstuck because you will know exactly the day and the hour based on the equinox system, but not on the Karaite system.
That's why God reset the calendar.
Yeah. So, if you want copies of this material, I think we handed out a number of these a while ago, Genesis of History, the Fourth Kingdom. I've certainly got it on my website, along with the introductory book that I put together on this, Framework for the Study of the End of Revelation. And again, it's not necessarily light reading. But if we are going to inherit the history of our forefathers, they studied and they pleaded with God, they got on their knees. If they didn't understand, they said, Lord, show me, give me an understanding. We are going to have to fight for this, to get an understanding. And so I just felt that I should put that out to you tonight and ask you to pray about it. And we shall close in prayer. We're going to put names up on the board. Turn the video off, thank you.